so I don't forget. We're recording, and they're going to be posted on our website after the second session of each series so that people can watch them who weren't able to attend in the summer. Don't forget, I think most of you know by now, we'll send out an attendance link at the end. That's where you fill out, give us a little bit of feedback. We're constantly updating our presentations based on that feedback, and that's how you'll get paid at the end of the summer and get your CPDUs. Don't forget to watch our website, sign up for future sessions. If you missed one, they're starting to repeat now, so you should be able to find it in there. And then there are other people giving sessions as well. We have a couple Glenbrook South teachers doing an ed puzzle session at the end of the month. I think the Zoom ones are over for now at district office, but those have been running, and then there's some at Glenbrook North as well. So before we get into the details of our presentation today, we just want to mention how the ideas that we're presenting are grounded in research. We know that many of you have attended one of our sessions before, so we'll just mention a couple of things quickly. As described in other presentations, John Hattie has collected macro data to determine what he calls effect sizes and designates 0.4 as indicating 1 year's worth of learning in 1 year's time. Any input that has a greater than 0.4 effect size is considered to be good because you're getting more power out of the strategy. His research shows that certain things we do as educators can have very big effect size on student learning if we do them with consistency and fidelity. So for this work here, we're really just focusing on one input, teacher clarity. And teacher clarity is a little more complicated than maybe it sounds. It really has 6 components. It has, the first component is clarifying what students are learning. The second one is plan summative assessments accordingly. Sequence lessons logically, give clear expectations, have students practice, and then have them take that summative assessment that you planned early on. Hattie's research shows that it has an effect size of 0.75, which is in the high impact area. So today's work on planning your assessments can greatly contribute to impacting the outcome for your students. There are so many directions we could take this presentation today on assessments, and we want to acknowledge up front that there are some issues that we're just not going to be able to address, and we can't solve all of these issues in 1 hour, but we want to acknowledge these things before we just set them aside. We've done, as you know, a lot of work looking at resources from Stanford and Northwestern, and both of them are talking a lot about, you know, there's just no such thing as 100% test security. So in that regard, we'll let go of that hope. And there are monitoring softwares out there that can help with test security, but we don't have one in the Glenbrooks. And since we really are in a temporary situation, there's not much reason to talk about the monitoring software. Instead, we're going to discuss what are best practices and research that are advocated for assessment in general. One of the things, Marcia, if you could go to the next slide, one of the things we've talked to many teachers about is this idea of protecting their current exams. People don't want to use their current, you know, there are different ways you could use your current exam and put it in Mastery Manager or different things, but then it's out there in the world of technology, and people don't want to do that, which we agree with, because rewriting these exams it's very time consuming. And again, we're in a temporary situation. So one idea is to think of alternative ways to assess now in our temporary e-learning environment. This may mean we have to accept that what we create for now may not be our favorite or best way to assess. We want to try to help find a way that will work for you in the now, and that will give you a good assessment that you feel pretty good about, even if it's not the perfect one. So what else can we do? We can focus on learning by being clear with students. If they understand what they need to know, like understand their targets and the intention of the outcome, which is what we just talked about, part of teacher clarity. That first step is making sure the outcomes are clear for the unit. Then they can focus on those when preparing for assessments. When they are unsure of the targets or unsure of the intent of the exam or what they are required to know, they are more likely to feel the need to not follow the rules of the assessment. We do work more if you go back still, Marshall. We do work more on this in the course-on-course mapping, where we really spend some time on targets. And there is another one on August 5th. But we can also work on prevention by focusing on the positive aspects of responsibility, personal development, and learning to lower the rewards. By assigning many little assessments, it lowers the incentive for students to try to cheat on the assessment or to be dishonest on them, because smaller assessments worth fewer points often promote better academic integrity. All right, go ahead, Marshall. But we can also be clear about expectations, and some of you have come to pretty much in every session we talk about expectations. If we set our expectation, are clear with students, which again is part of that teacher clarity that Hattie is talking about, we can help students become more likely to hold up the integrity of the exams. You've seen this before, many of you, either during the school year, we use this when we're talking about in-person classrooms as well, but you can use this as a structure to kind of think through what are your expectations for your students, in particular during summative assessments. So how are they supposed to act? What can they do and what are they not allowed to do? How can they talk? Maybe not at all, right? But being clear about that, of what the expectations are from you about the interaction between them or them and another person, can be very helpful. And what about the space? Where are they taking it? When are they taking it? And that kind of thing. We do have one more workshop coming up. It's a 2-hour workshop on setting expectations, where you could come to that, and this could be your particular focus, is to build your expectations during summative assessments. All right, Marshall. Also, Stanford puts out this argument that we should design our assessments with open resource in mind. So if our assessments are designed from upfront with thinking about that students are going to use their assessments, does that help us change our questions or change what we do with that assessment, knowing that they have these resources available when they're at home? So it's just something to keep in mind. Another piece is to consider the timing. In the fall, we will have synchronous learning sessions. So you could use your synchronous time for the exam. So we don't necessarily promote watching them during the synchronous time. You could decide that yourself, but I think nevertheless, if your synchronous time is, I'm making this up, from 8 to 8:30, then they have to do their assessment from 8 to 8:30. That can help cut down on their ability to be dishonest about the exam. And then also maybe setting up timing restrictions in other ways. You still would have to consider those students who have time and a half on their 504 plan or their IEP, but it is something that would be open to you this fall that wasn't available to you in the spring. And another thing that you could possibly do, I'm seeing Lauren's comment, I would assume this includes a requirement that students have their video on. That's if you're watching them. But we would have to talk about there will be no district policy on cameras being on. So the last thing here is the use of honor codes. The University of Colorado at Denver says the research shows that honor codes and using honest sign-offs cut down on dishonesty and on assessments by 30% or just over 30%. So that's something to consider as well. I know some of us do that in various ways. It's in the syllabus and different things, but an honest sign-off, I thought this was an interesting example, so I'll read it. This would be a math one, but you could adapt it to any subject. It's just, I certify that the calculations and data in this assignment were generated independently using only the tools and resources defined in the course, and I did not receive any external help, coaching, or contributions during the production of the work. Now, of course, again, that doesn't mean they actually did all that, but it is shown to lower and actually to improve academic honesty, which is what we would like to do. So Marshall's going to now talk a little bit more about the research and best practices around assessments, and I pass it off to him.
Thanks, Sharon. So Sharon shared a lot with you about kind of the behind the scenes piece, the setup, the context, And so what I want to dig into is the content of exams and some things you might consider regarding shifts that you might want to make from an in-person exam to an e-learning exam, considerations for what you might add or modify. So first we want to just draw your attention to the notion of these two types, broad types of assessments, performance assessments and then assessments of other evidence. And you're, I'm guessing, familiar with the notion that kids can show what they know, what they understand, and what they can do. And you can kind of think as the other evidence exams as being focused on knowledge with maybe some elements of understanding, and then performance assessments being focused on what they can do with that knowledge and understanding. And what we've learned about kind of best practices in the digital space is that a combination of these is going to be a really effective approach. So if you think about some of your summative assessments, unit exams, final exams from the year, and you start thinking about where they sit, where is the balance? Are they mostly other evidence or are they mostly performance assessment? And if they're more one than the other, can you add some elements to promote the balance between the two? And so what we're going to dig into is different facets of understanding that can be shown through different types of assessment. And when we're done going through these, we're going to talk about 6 facets of understanding. We're going to put you in breakout rooms, hopefully by discipline. You're going to be in a room with people who teach in the same department, or there might be crossover between North and South, but you'll be people from the same discipline to think about these 2 prompts. Is there a summative assessment that you're specifically worried about? And you have some thoughts about how you might modify it, or you want to talk with your group about how you might modify it. And then second, of these 6 facets of understanding that we're going to talk about, is there a particular one that you're thinking about that might be useful within your discipline? Now, we do want to, full disclosure, Sharon's doing all the work right now to get you into groups based on your discipline. We really hope that it's going to work. There's a small chance that the groups might be random, but we're pretty confident that we've got it figured out in Zoom. So hopefully that'll come true and you'll end up in groups with people in your same discipline. So having said that, let's talk about these 6 facets of understanding. Now, these come from Wiggins and McTighe, who hopefully you're familiar with. They're the UBD guys, the Understanding by Design guys. And you know, they write about essential questions and enduring understandings as a way to frame their classes or your classes. And they write about how curricular design should start with the design of the summative assessment. And then you should work backwards from that to figure out what your curriculum instruction is going to be. Now, within that creation of summative assessment, they focus on these 6 facets of understanding. I'm going to go through each of these one at a time to elaborate, but they are, as you can see, explaining, interpreting, applying, having perspective, having empathy, and then showing self-understanding. So let's dive into those. So first of all, when it comes to explaining, students can generalize, make connections, have a sound theory, and can put that theory in their own words. Really, this facet of understanding gets to the why of their answers. So, you know, I'm an English teacher, so if I were thinking about a grammar test, for example, if I gave kids 10 sentences and asked them to edit those sentences in the classroom, that would be an opportunity to add in the digital space an explaining component where I might ask them not just to fix those sentences, but to explain their thinking for at least some of them. And we'll get to balancing the burden, the rigor, with the burden of grading on you and kind of how you can navigate those waters without making it overwhelming for you. We'll revisit that. If you think about a math class, which is Sharon's discipline, of course, very similar possibilities, right? If you give a unit exam where kids have to show their work and come to an answer, maybe now you can add a component where kids also have to explain that work. Maybe they have to annotate the work that they show, or they have to produce a short video where they explain their thinking. What this accomplishes is it gets to that deeper understanding, and it also, as Sharon alluded to, helps maybe promote academic honesty, because it's much more difficult to be academically dishonest when you have to actually explain your thinking and not just put answers on a page. For a class like PE, you might think about if you had kids normally do an exercise or perform an athletic skill, maybe they would explain how they did that. What were the steps and how did they know that those were the steps? A second facet of understanding, the second one outlined by Wiggins and McTighe, is interpret. So the idea that the student can offer a plausible and supported account of a text or a data or an experience. So if you're a CTE teacher, for example, think about if you had kids create a spreadsheet of data in a business class, or if you had them working in a foods class and they had to finish a recipe successfully. Where interpret would come in would be the analysis of someone else's final product to show a deeper level of understanding. So maybe they take that spreadsheet and you give them a sample that's flawed, and as part of the summative assessment, not only do they produce their spreadsheet, but they analyze the one that's produced by someone else. In fine arts, you can imagine this working in tandem with the completion of a fine arts performance-based summative assessment. Not only do they produce their painting or their sculpture or their dramatic scene, but they also analyze one that's created by someone else. And the idea here is that they would show a deeper level of understanding by pointing to the specifics of the other person's work that they're interpreting. The third of 6 facets of understanding that Wiggins and McTighe talk about is applying. So the idea that a student can transfer, adapt, adjust, or address novel issues and problems. So think about a social studies classroom, for example, where maybe you, in the past, maybe you would test them on knowledge of particular historical events, whether or not they understand the deeper context. But then you give them a related concept or issue or social studies concept from contemporary times, and you ask them to make connections between those two. Can they transfer and adjust their understanding from the historical context to the modern context? In a world languages class, if you were giving a vocabulary summative exam that was maybe multiple choice in the past or fill in the blank in the past, maybe you're asking them to use that vocabulary in a new conversational structure. I want to pause here after 3 of the 6 to just say something that I meant to say at the outset, but that I think is worth emphasizing. Wiggins and McTighe are not naive about the fact that some of these facets work much better in certain disciplines than others, and they don't turn a blind eye to that. So if you're listening to us go through these facets of understanding, you're thinking, oh, that one really won't work for my discipline or for my summative assessment. They agree that some of these just do not lend themselves to particular disciplines. So they just want, what they encourage teachers to do is just to thoughtfully kind of put each lens on your summative assessments in order to possibly reject certain ones, but also, of course, possibly adopt and apply certain ones. All right, so moving forward, we'll go to the 4th of their 6, which is perspective, which is asking students to see the content of your course from different points of view with a focus on logic and thinking. So in an English classroom, a really straightforward question could be, what would you do if you were this particular character facing a particular dilemma within the plot of a text, right? And so that's testing the student's ability to apply their understanding of the text to the book through a shift in perspective. In STEM classes, you might ask kids to think about the implications of a scientific discovery or an invention for different groups of people, asking them to kind of think that through. What would be the impact? And of course, again, embedded within all of these types of prompts is the notion that kids still have to draw on their knowledge and understanding, but that they have to express it in a way that promotes the need to be academically honest. In a social studies class, you could use perspective to have kids, for example, write a letter from the perspective of a particular stakeholder during a specific historical time period to a politician of the time or to a newspaper of the time, really pushing them to think through how that person, that stakeholder, would be absorbing the knowledge and the information of the time. The next facet, the fifth one, is pretty closely related. Instead of perspective, it's framed as empathy. And really the difference is that instead of focusing on logic, you might focus on emotion when you prompt kids with a summative assessment that's focused on the facet of empathy. But certainly empathy and perspective are oftentimes going to go hand in hand. And some of the examples I was just mentioning, that's certainly going to be true. There can be a logical component, there can be an emotional component. But in humanities class, you might think of prompts like, how might blank feel in reaction to blank, right? And ask kids to fill in those blanks with a different person, depending on the content. For STEM classes, you might think about how kids could explain the concepts that you've been learning to someone who's just transferring into the class. What would be the emotional components of that? And how would they help someone else understand? That's an exercise in empathy that incorporates the content from your class. The sixth and final one that Wiggins and McTighe talk about is self-understanding. So this idea of really assessing their own levels of understanding and reflecting metacognitively on what they would have to do next in order to improve their levels of understanding. And this maybe sounds like a formative assessment kind of a structure, but certainly I think we all know that unit tests along the way really function as both, right? Where they are summative assessments, but they are also springboards to additional learning opportunities. And so the notion that you might prompt kids as part of a summative assessment to look back at how they did, to analyze how they did, even within the assessment itself, not necessarily just when you give it back to them with the grade, but also within the assessment itself, could be a really valuable thing for their learning, but also for your understanding of just how much they've absorbed in terms of the content of your discipline. Now, I cruised through those really quickly, and I want to tie them to something that you're all familiar with. So even if you've never done a deep dive into Wiggins and McTighe, you're, I'm assuming, familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, and maybe it's been a while since you looked at it, but we wanted to just show you that really there's a lot of similarities. Normally, Bloom's is shown as kind of this hierarchical diagram with remembering at the bottom and then slowly moving towards what are commonly called higher levels of thinking. But really what Wiggins and McTighe emphasize, and what we want to emphasize as well, is that that's a false hierarchy. It's really not about better or worse, or more important or less important. These are all just ways to express understanding, and ways to, if we think about these different categories, ways to jog our thinking about how we might assess that understanding in a way, like Sharon alluded to, that minimizes the likelihood that kids will want to and can be academically dishonest. Now, I'm going to zoom in on this graphic for you for just a minute. And if I can get it to go, there we go. And you can see these provide great verb roots. So when you're thinking about possibly editing some existing assessments or even building some new ones for the digital space, these verbs can be really, really helpful to help you match what you want to get at in terms of what you want to learn about their understanding to the particular aspect of Bloom's. Now, we're going to share this entire slide deck with you actually in just a few minutes. So you'll be able to get a good close look at this graphic on your own, and you can spend as much time with it as you want. Wiggins and McTighe do not published, or they have not published a graphic that's similar to this, but we did find one online that was created by someone else. We wanted to show you that as well. It's not as pretty, but you can see those 6 facets of understanding here. And again, the kinds of verbs or kind of sentence roots that you might use in order to assess these particular facets of understanding. And again, you'll have access to this. But if you think about wanting to get at how well kids can apply knowledge, for example, all of these verbs under that column of application can help you structure questions and prompts that will allow you to do that. So what we want to reiterate with those 6 facets in mind, with blooms in mind, is that a lot of times what you really want to aim to do, according to Northwestern and Stanford's research, is to try to combine the assessment of answers with required elaboration on thinking and understanding. So this idea that you, as Sharon alluded to, you might give that traditional exam during the synchronous time, but then maybe during the asynchronous time, students are then asked to submit an explanation, at least of some of the questions or the problems. In order to ease the burden on yourself and to not make it so that you have to grade literally hundreds of such explanations, you might have kids select one answer that they gave to elaborate on, or maybe they choose 3 and you grade 1, but they don't know which one you're going to grade. So early on, I referred to an example of a grammar test, and I referred to an example of a math test, which normally might have very objective, right or wrong answers, even if kids are showing their work. But imagine if you gave a test like that, a multiple choice test with 10 questions or 20 questions or 50 questions. They completed that during the synchronous time, and then during the asynchronous time, you either had particular questions in mind that you require that they elaborate on how they answered the question, or you let them choose, or a combination of the two. And that can really allow you to combine those 2 approaches, using the traditional with the expectation that they're able to elaborate and understand in order to promote academic honesty, because it would be difficult for kids to just answer with academic dishonesty those objective exam questions if they know that they also have to be able to explain it. And those explanations can come in a variety of forms, right? You can use tools like Flipgrid for them to video record themselves explaining. Kids could write out their explanations. You could use Google Docs, which would allow you to see the revision history if you're worried about kids doing written explanations that they simply copy and paste in. There are lots of steps you can take to frame that, again, to prevent academic dishonesty and also to get to that deeper level of understanding. So as we referred to earlier, what we want to try to do now is put you into some breakout rooms organized by discipline. And when you get into those rooms, what we're going to ask you to do is first introduce yourselves and then talk about these 2 topics. And we'll try to copy and paste these 2 into the message that you'll receive in the groups. So, we hope that the time in those breakout rooms was valuable and that you got some ideas swirling, some feedback, some thoughts from your colleagues. There were some messages in the chat that we were looking at while you all were in the breakout rooms that we wanted to talk about. And then we thought that we could just spend a little bit of time as a large group with questions or things that people want to discuss. Obviously, that's challenging with 100 people, but we thought we would give it a try. And if anybody has particular topics or questions that you want to bring up, first of all, though, let us talk about the couple topics that were in the chat that we wanted to bring up. So someone asked about a link to the website where the coaches offerings are listed, and Sharon's going to go ahead and paste that into the chat. So if you don't have that bookmarked, or if you want to take a look, it'll be in there. An individual sent me a message, just to me, not to everybody, pointing out that some of the facets of understanding could be really difficult for students with particular special needs. And that's a really important point to bring up. And I'm really glad that person sent that message. And I think that what I would say in response to that is Wiggins and McTighe, just like they talk about those facets of understanding being not perfect fits for all disciplines, I think that we can definitely say that they're not going to be perfect fits for all years in school, freshman through senior, and they're not going to be perfect fits for all ability levels. And so I think the point is going to be to what they recommend is try to apply each of those 6 lenses and see what works and what doesn't. And I don't mean to say that in a way that makes it sound like that's a small task, because it's not. To think through existing summative assessments through additional lenses and then make those choices, it's a complex and possibly time-consuming task. But I think that's what Wiggins and McTighe would say regarding that concern. Sharon, were there any messages in the chat that were just to you that were worth addressing for the whole group?
There was a question about, are Wiggins and McTighe understandings a repackaging of Bloom's taxonomy? And I think they are different, but they certainly, as you pointed out, even just with looking at the 2 lists of verbs, overlap. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but.
Yeah. So
and then if we, oh, sorry, Marshall. I don't know, Lauren, are you still on the meeting?
Yep, I am.
Do you want, this has been a big question for everybody, and I think it is an important question in summative assessment, but you outlined here what the district is working on, which I think is a more recent update. So I don't know if you want to give a short update about cameras on and where that stands.
So I'll just preface my comments by saying very preliminary, still in its beginning stages, but as we look towards expectations for e-learning, both whether that's at the start of the year or any time during the year, based on the feedback we've heard from summer school teachers that we were actually talking about in our breakout group about the difficulty for the teacher of having all of the students have their camera off, or most, would be setting an expectation that students have their cameras on and explaining why that's so important and why that is necessary for e-learning to be successful. And then encouraging students or parents who have concerns about that to talk to their counselor and to work through those concerns. But what I've heard from teachers is that it's a lot about peer influence when they actually ask students, why didn't you have your camera on? Oh, well, no one else did. So I feel it's setting us up for a real challenging time with e-learning if we don't set that expectation. I understand there might be extenuating circumstances and that could be the exception, but I think the rule needs to be that the cameras are on. So I'm thinking that would be something that Jason and I would communicate as part of kind of our general expectations for e-learning.
Great, thank you.
So at this point, we've got a handful of minutes left. We thought we'd just open the floor. If anybody has ideas or questions that you would want to share with the entire group, certainly Sharon and I can try and answer, or we can kind of crowdsource. If you are more comfortable, you can, of course, type those kinds of questions into the chat. Totally up to you. I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen for a minute so that you can all see as many people as possible in the grid view, if we're going to have a conversation all together.
Hi, everybody. How you doing?
Good. So just to add in that people were asking about the Ed Puzzle, Liz Nemesek and Beth Bushik are offering that. It's the end of it's next week, I believe, early in the week and later in the week. And Ben Widener just posted the Ed Puzzle sign up link there. So if you're interested in that, that's there as well.
Not next week, the following week.
The following week. Okay, thank you, Beth. I'm rushing July. I knew it was the end of July, but.
And I see Aparna asked if all the offerings can be put into one place. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, but I believe there is someone working on that.
Well, there is a place, and Lena just answered that in the chat. They're in a Google Classroom that Cam shared the class code with.
Ah, there we go.
So.
Can I ask another question about the cameras? If nobody else is going to jump in with one that's specific to the PD today. So I guess it's actually kind of Lauren specific, but I know everything you're doing is preliminary. Great. I guess what I'm wondering is if we do put out a statement saying the expectation is that cameras on, are we still having the same issue where we expect that legally it's not required? Is that kind of what we're thinking is going to happen, or do we not know yet?
I'm not sure that the reason we said you can't require it is for legal reasons. I think it was more just as we were like transitioning into summer school and making so many changes, you know, for kids and teachers, that knowing that there are kids who have like legitimate concerns about putting their camera up, not just pure influence, not to de-emphasize that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know, there's an issue, there's some legal parameters around recording that we're working through to try to get clarity on that, recording Zoom sessions, but I think the camera thing, it was just like, no, it's not required. And then it really became an option that a lot of kids took advantage of. And so unfortunately, our summer school teachers have had to kind of be the testers with that. But yeah, I don't think we'll have any legal problem saying it's required or it's an expectation that we expect, but talk to us if there's an extenuating circumstance.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
So Marshall, I'm cognizant of the time. Should we go ahead and wrap up, and then anyone who wants to hang out for more questions can do that?
Definitely. So as always, everyone, we want to thank you for attending. We hope that the information and the time to chat was really valuable for you. South teachers, you know that as you're thinking about your specific courses, you can, of course, reach out to any and all four of us for additional thinking partners, and people who don't work at South and South teachers, you of course all know about the resources that are available to you, especially on the technology side from the district technology team. Sharon is going to go ahead and paste the attendance and feedback form. Remember, to get paid, to get credit for having attended this session, you got to fill that out. Hopefully it'll just take you a few minutes. And as Sharon said at the outset, if you do want to hang out for a few more minutes and chat about any related topics, we'll stick around for the next 10 or so. And if you don't, that's great. We hope you have a great weekend. The days are blurring together, but it is actually Friday. So we hope you have a good one.